But one day I just sat in front of my computer and I typed surrogacy.
The second time I did surrogacy, and I mean, it's amazing.
And a custody case involving a surrogate mother of triplets. She is fighting the biological father for custody, claiming surrogacy contracts are unfair and not in the best interest of the children.
Whether we acknowledge it or not, this is a transaction, right? This is a very serious transaction. They are giving up their bodies for cash. How do we feel about that?
We've all probably read the headlines. What was once a highly niche pathway to familyhood, surrogacy, has increased in popularity due to the advancements in medical technology and changes in social attitudes towards non-traditional families. Surrogacy is often thought to be a treatment option for the infertile or an alternative option to adoption, and so to be celebrated in fulfilling people's desires to be parents. But surrogacy also often brings up uncomfortable conversations about what has been termed fertility tourism, exploitation, inequality, and the moral and ethical complexities which arise at the intersection of for-profit business models and the creation of families. It is why in some places like Germany and France, surrogacy is seen as violating the dignity of women, using them as the means to someone else's end, and therefore the practice is completely forbidden. But others, like the United Kingdom, view surrogacy as a gift from one woman to another and allow it on what is called altruistic purposes, basically expenses only basis. But others still, like the United States, Russia, and Ukraine, permit commercial surrogacy, viewing it as an expression of a woman's autonomy to engage in surrogacy of their own free will. So in today's video, we're gonna talk about it. We're gonna take a look at what the legal and ethical protections are like across the globe, and ultimately the decision that countries have made to either allow it or just ban it altogether. So, let's take a look. But before we get started, I want to give a huge thank you to MyHeritage for sponsoring today's video. Our families, both past and present, have been intrinsically shaped by migration. Some of our ancestors fled religious persecution, others left to escape poverty, and some risked leaving everything they knew behind just to simply build something new for themselves, a sentiment that we can personally relate to.
The entire process was so intuitive. They mailed the DNA kits directly to your door, and after a simple 2-minute cheek swab, you mail off the samples to their lab for results.
And the MyHeritage DNA test is unique, not only helping us to connect with distant and close relatives across the globe through shared DNA, but also revealing our ethnicity estimates and our percentage breakdown across 42 supported ethnicities and 2,114 geographic regions.
So, what are we?
Yeah, let's find out. Jonathan, you are...
Oh my gosh.
47% Scandinavian.
Well, how's that work?
Really?
Oh gosh, it keeps going. 37.4% Irish,
Scottish
and Welsh.
Uh-huh.
Oh, this is a really cool interface.
Yeah,
7% Greek.
Maybe
I'm
that's like
Greek and Italian.
Ooh, maybe that's like the dark
This must
hair.
be my skin tone. 5% Balkan.
5.4% Balkan. Okay.
Okay.
Very cool. And
I'm English.
First
Wait, no. Where's German?
you're not even
I'm not even German at all. How does that make sense? We did an entire video about how my ancestors came from Germany.
But apparently they didn't at
If
all.
I had a piece of paper, I could have a German passport right now. But I have 0% German in me. Ashton is What?
I beat you
no.
by 0.6%.
Are we related? I swear.
Scandinavian.
Oh, you're very English.
Ooh, 26.3% English. I'm not entirely surprised at that. My mom's family has been.
Oh, Northwest European. Okay.
I'm more German than you are.
You're actually European. Yeah.
And yeah, that's Germany. Wait.
North and West European. 4% North African.
What?
Nigerian? Where did that come from?
Okay, first off, that is wild and so cool.
Well, the first three make sense to me.
Yeah, no.
The bottom two, I don't see that in the family tree. Where could that have gotten lost?
That would mean I have like a great grandparent or a great great grandparent, probably great great grandparent.
So it has to be.
That is
It has to be on your mom's side.
great great grandmother on my mom's side was adopted. It was always sort of this mystery in our family.
I think we now have some more answers that we can share with your family, and we should call them later today to
Oh, I think we're
explain
gonna
this.
get
I
on the
think
phone right now.
your family's gonna be just as shocked, and I have to say, I now have an answer of why my beard is red.
And by the way, guys, MyHeritage has a promotion going on right now. So click the link down below in the description and use the code Ashton to get free shipping. Now, one thing is for sure, surrogacy is big business, but how big that business is, well, up for debate. Now, when we try to calculate how many children have been born through international commercial surrogacy arrangements, is actually something that's incredibly difficult to track because, one, we didn't traditionally used to track things like that, but also a lot of these procedures are happening at private clinics, which also kind of makes that number gathering a bit difficult. But regardless of what report you read, it's clear that pretty much everybody comes to the same consensus, and that's that the numbers are rising. The non-governmental organization, the International Social Service, estimates that over 20,000 are being born through surrogacy annually. The BBC, citing official Indian estimates, reported 5,000 surrogate babies born each year in India alone. And in the Ukraine, a country where there was a booming surrogacy industry prior to the war, reported 396 cycles of IVF with surrogate mothers in private clinics. But current estimates place it at a worth of approximately $14 billion globally. But all signs point to that number increasing exponentially, with one evaluation anticipating the industry's worth to top $129 billion by 2032. But I should note, while surrogacy is big business, that doesn't necessarily mean that that total sum of money actually makes its way directly to the gestational carrier. In India, for example, the surrogacy industry is estimated to be worth $2.3 billion, of which about just a third usually goes to the surrogate mother, with the biggest payments seeming to be made to agencies, middlemen, and doctors or clinics. You know, I actually found that quite interesting when I was doing the research for this video. That 1/3 statistic tended to come up again and again and again. It seems that no matter where you're looking, whether that's in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, really anywhere around the world, it's kind of about a 1/3 of the total costs that end up going to the surrogate directly. But that doesn't actually mean that it's the same amount of money that actually gets paid around the world, because the prices for their services actually vary dramatically. For example, a typical surrogate in the United States makes around $50,000 to $60,000 total, but she also gets paid another $5,000 to $10,000 in various benefits. Surrogates with unique qualifications, like living in California or having previous experience with uncomplicated births, often also receive an additional $10,000 or more. Now, US surrogates typically earn the highest amount of anywhere reported in the world, And since those costs literally tally up to the cost of a small house in some parts of the US, it's unsurprising that many families go overseas looking for such services. As I mentioned earlier, Ukraine was a top destination for surrogacy services, and women there can earn, for example, up to $20,000, which, don't get me wrong, is a fraction of the cost in the United States, but it does represent more than 8 times the average yearly income. And remember, this is still 1/3 of the total costs paid by prospective parents by the time you add in legal fees, administration fees, and medical fees, on top of everything else. And ultimately, the extreme cost of surrogacy, especially in the United States, limits its availability to the wealthy and to high-profile celebrities, raising important ethical questions about whether this is really an appropriate use of resources, especially given the possibility of adoption. And in addition to these questions about the ethics and wealth that surrounds surrogacy, many have also raised questions about how surrogacy ultimately affects women. Some feel that surrogates have a right to choose what to do with their own bodies, but others object to surrogacy on the grounds that systematic oppression is what drives women into surrogacy in the first place, or even that it's just unethical for women to sell their bodies, arguing that it parallels prostitution. And listen, I'm not here to weigh in on one side or the other, but it is very clear that it's these ethical questions that ultimately determine whether or not surrogacy is even legal in the first place in your country.
Italy is set to bring in a law that will make surrogacy a universal crime for Italians. Now, under the proposed law, people could of course face a penalty of about $1 million and up to 2 years in prison if they were to seek out surrogacy services.
All right, now in the last section, I talked about the price of surrogacy, but what's actually really interesting is that when you look at the data on why someone would really seek out surrogacy in the first place, it's not always necessarily about price that drives someone to look abroad for these services. And it actually might all come down to the fact that surrogacy might actually be banned in your home country. For example, surrogacy agreements are legal in some parts of Europe, but it's complicated. Surrogacy for altruistic purposes, such as to help out a friend or family member, is permitted in the UK, Belgium, and the Netherlands. However, commercial surrogacy is not. In these countries, surrogacy is considered a non-legal agreement, so although payments may be made, they are generally only allowed to solely cover the expenses and cannot be undertaken for profit or as a job or income. And this allowance of altruistic surrogacy is generally pretty much the same as the laws that currently exist in Canada, Brazil, and Australia. But in other countries in Europe, such as France, Italy, and Germany, all forms of using a surrogate mother are illegal. So it's actually prohibited by law here. There are a few reasons cited for this ban, but the big one is that surrogacy commodifies the human body and creates a system where babies are essentially a product of labor. And it's not an inanimate object like a doll on a production line. It's a living human child. The labor of the surrogate and the result of that labor together put the surrogate in a different point on a spectrum of various types of work. And that point of view is in stark contrast to how surrogacy is viewed in other parts of the world. In Europe, fully legal commercial surrogacy is only available in Ukraine and Georgia. In South and Central America, it is also available in Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico. Iran is the only Muslim country where surrogacy is legally and religiously accepted and supported. Here, both commercial and altruistic surrogacy is supported, and the mother can be compensated for her services beyond just simple reimbursement for medical expenses. And as I mentioned earlier, surrogacy for commercial purposes is also available in the United States. But interestingly, this actually varies from one state to another. In addition to the fact that you're also going to see variations not just on commercial surrogacy, but also who has access to commercial surrogacy. And that leads me to my next section.
Tollerabile, queste famiglie sono stanche di essere discriminate.
È un simbolo di modernità, ma di una società infame che confonde i desideri con i diritti, che sostituisce Dio con il denaro.
In many countries that offer commercial surrogacy for native and foreign applicants, they often have one very interesting stipulation. You have to be in a heterosexual relationship. Now, for reference of scale, the significant majority of those who seek surrogacy are heterosexual couples. And actually, interestingly, the groups with the fastest growth for fertility treatment were among those same-sex couples and single women. Now, without a doubt, fertility treatments like surrogacy have allowed a much broader and fuller expansion of familyhood. But the problem is that science has really, in a lot of cases, actually progressed a lot further than the legal constructs of traditional familyhood. Iran, Ukraine, and Georgia explicitly only offer their services to heterosexual couples. And in the US, since the federal government has yet to enact any laws regarding surrogacy, it has been left up to the states to legislate surrogacy contracts. And although almost every state in the US allows surrogacy, some have placed limits on who has access to it. Louisiana takes this one step further by stipulating that the married couples are also further restricted by only being able to use the couple's own egg and sperm. Which of course has a twofold effect. If you're a couple who are experiencing fertility issues or one partner happens to be sterile, this effectively means that you're blocked from using surrogacy in your home state. And in Louisiana, this also means that the language of the law basically prohibits same-sex couples from accessing this type of care as well. And here's the thing. Even if you sit in the camp of people that really believe that surrogacy should only be available to heterosexual married couples, it's important to remember that oftentimes restrictive legal language has a way of coming back to bite you. In 2008, there was a landmark case of baby Menage, a child born to an Indian surrogate who was left in legal limbo after the Japanese commissioning parents divorced before her birth. Neither surrogate nor the intended mother wanted custody of the baby, and the commissioning father, who did want the child, was not legally allowed to adopt as a single person under Indian law. Louisiana, I'm looking at you here because I really feel like this case underscores just how complicated family law is. And in this particular case, not only was the parentage under question, but also the citizenship of the new baby as well. If the child does not return home with the commissioning parents, the authorities in that home country must decide whether to give effect to the agreement that took place overseas and allow them to become the legal parents in their home jurisdiction. Now, in most countries, the well-being of the child comes first, and this means that the authorities are often forced to accept the rules of the arrangement, turning sometimes a blind eye to exploitive or legally ambiguous practices that might have taken place abroad. However, it may be really difficult to actually come to any form of international consensus simply based on the very different attitudes that different cultures have towards surrogacy in the first place. And this decidedly international component is, I think, exactly the topic for the final section of this video.
Another core principle of the Convention of the Rights of the Child is that every child has a right to an identity, to a nationality, to have their birth registered, and to know and be cared for by their parents. Do you think Japan Germany, India were thinking about the best interests of the child? No.
Interestingly, despite the fact that surrogacy is booming, the list of countries that actually offer surrogacy services is actually getting smaller and smaller. And this usually doesn't have a heck of a lot to do with the sexuality of the parents, or even whether or not people agree with altruistic or commercial surrogacy services. In fact, a lot of it kind of boils down to how we recognize familyhood in the first place from a legal perspective. And ultimately, citizenship. And the fact is that oftentimes our laws are simply not nuanced enough to accommodate surrogacy. Consider this very recent case presented in front of the European Court of Human Rights. The case concerned an Icelandic same-sex couple who had been recognized as the legal parents of a child born by a surrogate mother in California. By virtue of his birth in the United States, the child did acquire US citizenship, and thus had the possibility to enter Iceland together with his intended mothers on the basis of his US passport. But upon return to Iceland, the intended mothers applied for the transcription of the California birth certificate of the child into the Icelandic civil registries, which was refused. Notably, the domestic ban on surrogacy and the principle of mater omnis seata est, which means that only the woman who gives birth to a child can be recognized as his or her legal parent upon birth. And the European Court of Human Rights actually sided with the Icelandic authorities on this case. Now, kind of thankfully in this case, the child was born in the US, where we have jus soli, commonly referred to as birthright citizenship. So this child, despite being recognized by California as having Icelandic parents, still acquired US citizenship because he was born in the United States. But what happens in a very similar situation where that child is born in Georgia or Iran or in Ukraine, where a gay couple from Belgium had actually paid a surrogate to have their son? But Belgian authorities refused to accept the men as the boy's legal parents. Neither Belgium nor Ukraine recognized the baby as a citizen. And he ended up spending the first 16 months of his life with foster parents and another year in an orphanage before he was finally allowed into Belgium. And this lack of regulation around international commercial surrogacy has left many babies in literal stateless limbo. And again, without citizenship, stateless children can be denied basic rights to things like healthcare and education. And I think this is wildly fascinating and a very complex issue that many governments around the world are really currently trying to grapple with. Surrogacy for me brings up a lot of issues that I think we as a global community really haven't come to a general consensus on. Science has allowed a lot of people around the globe to pursue familyhood, and I think that's something that should be celebrated. Completely just my own personal take on it. I can understand completely the wish to ban surrogacy for commercial purposes, but that also brings up the question of like, should a woman still be able to make that decision for herself? Like, why is it the government's job to make that decision for her? I don't know. I found myself conflicted on so many of these points that I really would love to hear from you down in the comment section on what you think about all of this, because yeah, I personally can see both sides of that coin, and I think this is really fascinating, especially given just how present this issue is and just how many countries around the world have also not come to a consensus on it. So please let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So I'll see you next Sunday. Tschüss!
Story that is new DNA, not Jesus. Underscores just how we. Hell.
It's been a while, hasn't it, honey?
It's been a while since I've done this.
And the mind.
Oh my god, there's a massive stink bug.
Ooh, God, I hate this time of year.
It's like on the, you can probably like see it on our face.
Great. Also, if we could please just briefly, for a moment, circle back to the fact that I am the only person in the family carrying the weight of the German gene over here for the Black Forest family.
That's pretty accurate, yeah.
That's really funny. I mean, in truth, like we were talking about with you though, I would imagine that the strong Scandinavian genes also probably link back to the fact that both of our families are from right on the border.
Yeah, they're right on the border of Denmark and Germany. So that could be where that came from.
Yeah.
Maybe our families originated there and came down, or that's actually kind of where the line was drawn, where that part of our DNA originated.
That's really cool.
But I mean, look at this. Scandinavian English, you're like me. We both need to wear SPF 100.